Hi, I'm Olive on Topp, burlesque performer and empowerment coach, and I want to talk about building emotional capacity. The reason I think that this is really important is because building emotional capacity is super central to achieving our goals. If everything we do or don't do is to feel or not feel an emotion, then everything we want is on the other side of a feeling. That makes sense. So, the biggest fear you have, whatever's holding you back, is likely a feeling. You're afraid of feeling a feeling. So, for example, if I want to build a business, but I'm too afraid of failure and what feelings that's going to create, perhaps it's sadness, perhaps it's shame, then I might just never do it. I might just stay in my soul sucking job because I don't want to feel the feeling. Get it? So there's a lot of reasons why we want to build that emotional capacity, which is essentially like a muscle. So many of us aren't really taught we aren't taught emotional capacity. We aren't taught how to sit in our emotions, and we spend a lot of our lives trying to avoid them. So here's a couple quick tips for how to build emotional capacity. So first of all, I talk about this all the time, it's pretty much in every video, but understanding that your thoughts create your feelings. So you have a thought, it's going to create a feeling, whatever that is. If your thought is, I'm a piece of crap, then it's probably going to create feelings like shame, sadness, depression, whatever that might be. If you have a thought like, I'm doing the best I can, perhaps that's going to create feelings of calm or peace or confidence. So you can go ahead and try and think of a thought and see what feeling that elicits. But that's the core. Our thoughts create our feelings. Also getting really clear on what you do or don't do to feel or not feel an emotion. So as I was saying, everything we're doing or not doing is to feel or not feel an emotion. So how are you acting or reacting to emotions that you're feeling? So it's usually the negative ones or the difficult ones. We either avoid them, we numb out, we might mindlessly scroll through social media, or we might binge eat, or we might, binge watch television, or we try and create other emotions that feel better. So false emotions like, we might get a hit of dopamine by buying online shopping or gambling or whatever. We're trying to create another emotion instead of feeling that negative one. And sometimes we even lash out in ways that we don't want to, like we start a fight with our spouse or yell at our kids because we're trying to just create a new emotion or overwhelmed by the feeling that we're having. So getting really clear on what it is that you do when you're experiencing that will be really helpful. I think it's really helpful to think of emotions as just as sensations. That's just like energy in our body. It's a feeling. That's why they're called feelings. It's a physiological response, because it makes it slightly less scary. Because if that's what we're avoiding, we're really just afraid of feeling a sensation in our body, whether it's temperature or tension or whatever. Breaking it down to that very basic form can be super helpful. And then obviously being willing to feel any emotion is going to be super key to your success. Knowing that, if you're afraid, if your emotion is fear or, or sadness or anxiety or whatever, being willing to experience that and just being willing to experience that sensation in your body. In order to be willing to do that, I think knowing that our emotions won't kill us, generally speaking, they can feel really awful and really unpleasant, but generally speaking, they're not going to harm you. What can be harmful is actually not feeling our emotions, right? Is repressing our emotions. There's lots of research to support that it actually has really negative health outcomes. So even more incentive for feeling our emotions. Also, just getting comfortable, or at least accepting that it's going to be uncomfortable. Like a lot of us feel a lot of, sense of entitlement, and maybe that's not it, but to being comfortable. And part of life is just being uncomfortable and pushing ourselves. I'm not talking about enduring and overriding our needs, but I'm talking about understanding that sometimes emotions are uncomfortable, and that's okay. Being willing to be uncomfortable, being willing to sit with them, acknowledging it might just be uncomfortable, and knowing that the more we resist it, the more uncomfortable it gets. One really helpful tactic I try is sort of narrating the sensation in my body. So I've had a thought, I've identified the thought, I've identified the emotion. You can even do this if you're not even sure what thought caused it. Just like, oh, I'm having something happening in my body. I think I'm feeling something. What's happening? And if it feels safe to sort of tune into your body, acknowledging that it doesn't for everyone, but if it feels safe to sort of tune inward and just say like, what is happening? Okay, I'm like feeling maybe like some butterflies in my stomach, or like maybe there's a heat rising up my neck, or like a tension in my chest or my throat, or my jaw clenches. Whatever that is, just paying attention to it, giving it a bit of space. And I find when I track that, and sometimes I even narrate it out loud if I'm, alone, uh, it just gives the emotion the space it needs, instead of like trying to push it down and be like, ooh, that's a feeling I don't want to feel, just push that down. And I don't know if you've ever had that experience where that just follows you around all day and you're trying to like distract yourself from it, but every once in a while this feeling comes up. But I find when I give myself the space to just be like, what is that? Oh, okay, that's shame. Let's just sit in shame for a minute and just feel what that feels like, knowing it's going to be uncomfortable. It starts to dissipate a lot quicker. And then when you start to do that, you start to build more emotional capacity, obviously, but ability to identify what the emotions are. So sometimes with clients, what I'll do is actually just give like a worksheet of really basic emotions, like our most core emotions, and we'll create thoughts that create feelings, and we'll track what happens. So like, I know when I feel joy, it's like this lightness and like a fluttering in my stomach, and like my heart beats really fast, or whatever it might be. So that when those things happen, I'm like, oh yeah, this joy, I'm experiencing joy right now. So just sort of getting more vocabulary, I guess, around our emotions. And then another thought that I like to have that helps with emotional capacity is that feeling emotions, both positive and negative, is part of being alive. It's a fantastic and difficult part of being alive, and being human. And that, the positive ones feel so positive because there's the absence of the negative. We know that when things are difficult, how hard that is. So when they are, when we have these positive emotions, they feel even better. They exist because of each other. And just knowing that that's just part of the experience, and that you are always going to feel both positive and negative emotions. You're never going to get to a point in your life where you don't feel negative emotions. It's just, how do we get to a point where we recognize them and allow space for them, instead of reacting to them in ways that we don't want to, and having a life that we don't want to be having because we're just reacting to emotions. So those are a few tips for building emotional capacity. If you have questions, get at me. If you want support doing this, I do one-on-one coaching, and I have a blog about this on my website at oliveontop.com, as well as lots of courses that are either in session or coming up that we work through these sort of tactics and more. So good luck building emotional capacity.